John. John, where'd you grow up? Where are you from originally?
Euless, Texas.
Tell me about how you grew up.
So, April 10th, 1979, my dad killed himself. And that's really the gist of my story and how my life's played out to this point, actually. I had no idea how much that was going to impact the rest of my life.
How old were you?
11 years old. Yeah, I was 11 years old. So, as an 11-year-old, dad kills himself. I really just kind of went through life from that point on, just lost. Didn't have that father walking alongside me, showing me, telling me what it looked like to be a man and a good son and all of those things. Didn't get all that, right? As a normal rite of passage, every son deserves to be told that he's loved. He's, dad's proud of him, believes in him. You have what it takes. You're a good son, all those things. And so because I didn't get that, I was just kind of lost. Right after my mom, I didn't feel like I could go to her because I knew she had a lot on her plate. So I'm like, I'm not going to take all my stuff as an 11-year-old and all the concerns and worries I had. So, for me, I was walking around town essentially for the next several years, just kind of feeling like there was this scarlet letter on my chest. And everybody was whispering, hey, that's the boy whose dad killed himself, right? So I had all this shame and guilt. And
then on top of it, you didn't know why he did it, I'm sure.
I didn't, and I found the gun 2 weeks before that. 2 weeks before he killed himself, I found the gun that he did it with. I was in the closet as a young man, just playing around, and all of a sudden I stumbled upon this sawed-off shotgun. And I was like, whoa. And within, 30 seconds or so, I heard this. My dad was a big man. I heard this, son, don't you ever tell anybody you found this. Now get out of here. So, looking back, he was an 11-year-old, looking back on that time and going, okay, could I have done something different? Could I have told somebody about the gun? So many of us as young kids, we take all this in and we think weird things, but it was like, for me, it was, man, was it me? Did he kill himself because of me? Because the things I did or something. So there was all this guilt, shame, unworthiness. And there was, many, many years after he passed away, up until actually just probably 5 or 6 years ago, I'd have this reoccurring dream. And it was that I saw my dad out somewhere and he hadn't really killed himself. Like at a gas station or grocery store. I mean, time and time again. And then when I was younger and it first started happening, I'd run up to him. He'd have his back turned, right? But he looked just like my dad. I'd run up to him and turn him around and go, like, Dad. And it wasn't him. And this happened over and over and over again. It was that longing for a father, right? And so I remember I would wake up just devastated that it wasn't real, that it wasn't true. And so, it was difficult growing up without a dad, and getting all those things that we need as a son. So I started drinking when I was in high school. Started when in college, it probably got a lot worse.
Before we get into your story, what was your dad into what kind of work was he doing?
So my father, to give you the background, he grew up. This is what I learned at 41 years old. I had no idea.
You didn't know?
I had no idea all this story. I'm 41 years old, and I'd gotten to this place where I learned about this idea of a father wound, right? And so I was drinking to medicate it, right? And so at some point, in my late 30s, I came to a place of real brokenness. And it was a place I believed God had to take me because I was having too much fun running from him, right? It was a place where he had to take me to. And so a friend of mine, we're having this golf outing. And, I start sharing with him some of the issues I was going through with my dad and all the other stuff that went on. And at one point he turned to me and he said, you grew up without a father, right? And I said, yeah. And I went on to give him this great 10-minute explanation about my mom. And then he turned to me and said, but was she a dad? And that's when I went, wow, I've never thought about that. So literally from that walking away from the golf course going, okay, I'm not some weirdo that's got some crazy thing that nobody else has. There's like a name for it, this father wound, right? He starts to tell me about it. And I'm like, finally, I felt there was a name to this disease or this issue that no doctor had been able to, name and whatever else. So I started going and having conversation with my mom. And I knew there was something to it because of my behavior. I was drinking to medicate. I didn't want to feel all the anger and all the emotions that I had toward my dad because of this abandonment and betrayal, this father wound, right? So I was like, I gotta dig into this. I gotta figure this thing out. So I go and start having a conversation with my mom and start finding out the story about my dad. So, his mom had been married 5 times, grew up without a stable father figure. He was dropped off in the middle of New Orleans, Louisiana at the age of 16. And she just said, adios, have a good life. And she left with her truck driving husband. So my dad grew up a really rough life. He actually had a job he lived over a bowling alley and had a job, and he was the pin setter. So he would actually have to get up really early every morning before school in high school and go hunt for scrap metal to then have lunch money. There were some ladies there in the bowling alley that would actually set out food for him at night, and so he'd have dinner and some food to eat. Coaches played a really pivotal role in his life. One of his high school coaches bought him his first suit for like prom or something, and then helped him get a scholarship in college. But as time went on, I started hearing all these stories. Well, my dad was a brilliant businessman by everybody you talk to, really sharp, but just struggled to use that in good ways. And at one point, he had a tire store and turned that into like 4 tire stores and was doing really well. And somewhere along the way, he met a couple of guys, befriended a couple of guys, and they just happened to be in the mafia. And so...
Today's video is sponsored by Aura Frames. Why take hundreds of photos only to have them hidden on your phone, rarely seen by anyone ever again? Aura Frames let you easily display your photos on a beautifully Wi-Fi connected picture frame. With Aura, you can share your photos and videos to faraway family members and friends who are always asking for photos. Are your parents hard to shop for? Aura is a perfect gift for even the pickiest parents. It is a way better gift than a gift card they'll never use. Aura Frames are a convenient gifting solution because the frames come in this beautifully packaged gift box. Plus, you can add photos to the frame without unwrapping it, so the frame will be ready to go as soon as it's plugged in. I'm going to see my dad soon, and my dad's always asking me for photos. And I figured this is a perfect way to show him all the photos of his grandkids, of us, of everything I've got on my phone that never gets seen. So this is a perfect way to give him something for Father's Day that he'll love. Built-in sensors automatically adjust display brightness to match the lighting in your room. And when you're done for the night, your Aura frame turns off automatically when you turn out the lights. Manual scheduling is also available through the Aura app. Get $35 off the full price plus free shipping off the best-selling Carver mat by going to auraframes.com/SWU. Now back to the video.
He got into counterfeiting.
This is what city?
This is in Tennessee, in Memphis. That's where he was in and out of. Tennessee and Mississippi, I think there was a general area there. But he actually ended up getting busted walking off a plane in Memphis, Tennessee by the FBI. And they sentenced him to prison, so he did some prison time. While he was in prison, he was going back and testifying against some other people. So they reduced his sentence a little bit. Once he was released, the FBI had approached my family, approached my mom and dad and said, hey, we found a hit list. There's 4 names on it. The other 3 guys are dead. You're the only guy still living. So they essentially gave my mom and dad a choice. Look, you can go it on your own if you want, or we can put you in witness protection. So we went into witness protection for a little over a year or so. By that time, the FBI had come back to us and said, there's some more important people that have turned state's witness and things of that nature, and so they felt it was pretty safe for us to leave. And so we moved to Texas to kind of start a new life. But through all that, through all the stories, he had become very paranoid, I came to understand, was depressed, right? Suffered from depression. Obviously, you're going to kill yourself. There's some issues there, right? Mental health-wise. But as I heard these stories, it was as if God was showing me that My dad was a jacked up, flawed, wounded dude just like me, right? And we all are. We're imperfect, right? I mean, I've wounded my kids. I've screwed up. I still, to this day, mess up. But I think I began to see my dad as more as a reflection of me. Like we were more brothers probably than we were son and father, right? And so all the things that he struggled with, I'm sure he had shame and guilt and unworthiness and all of those things. And so I remember one time, this was a couple of years after I had kind of started the journey, found forgiveness for my dad, and my mom would tell me about this picture of my dad and us as three little boys in prison. I had two older brothers, and I was probably 2, 1.5. My brothers are maybe 5 and 7, something like that. And I didn't know. I'd never seen the picture before. So we go back after lunch and we're sitting at her house, and I see this picture for like the first time. My dad squatted down. He's got me right here, and my brothers are standing beside him. And I can just hear him saying, "Okay, boys, be big boys," and they're kind of puffing their chest out. And I looked in my dad's eyes, and I'm just like, okay, this is why I do what I do. I think if my father would have known about a father wound, his story could have been different, which means my story could have been different. He again didn't have that father. His dad died at 9. My dad killed himself at 11. There was a lot of similarities, and so I think I started to just see him for who he really was, and the gist of everything in the lessons that I learned was simply I came to understand that my dad could not give what he didn't have. Right? Growing up without a dad, with 5 different fathers, no stable role model, he didn't know how to be a dad. And so in the instance and in the story as it goes, when I found forgiveness, I was sitting in a counselor's office, and I'm a huge avid of therapists and counseling, because I don't know that I'd be where I'm at today without my guy. And so I'd go, and I remember, and this is so jacked up the way we are as men, but I remember every week I'd go, I'd tell my wife, "Don't tell anybody I'm going to counseling." It was that pride, manly thing, right? So I'd go, and every time there was something that I was learning that was helping. I was walking out of there going, yes, okay, now it was connecting the dots for me, right? And so literally in one of those counseling sessions, probably about 10 or 12 weeks in, the counselor's talking, and it was kind of like one of those cartoons or whatever where he's talking, and I just see his mouth moving, and I'm kind of going off somewhere. And I remember just hearing, not audibly, but just within me, how could you be so bitter, resentful, and angry towards a man who didn't know how to be a father? And literally, for me, that was the forgiveness. It was instant for me. And it was building up to that point where I learned all these things about my dad. And learning again, he couldn't give what he didn't have. And so literally I remember walking out of the counselor's office and something was different. It was like the sky was blue or the grass was greener. Every man's journey, every woman's journey is different when it comes to the forgiveness and how that all plays out. But mine, that's the way it happened. I've talked to many people, and it's a journey, 2, 3, 4 for years. I mean, it can be, a while. Mine just happened to play out that way. And so for me, just understanding, the power, the life-changing power of forgiveness, because I was an angry, tick dude for 30 years. And because of that, you'd have never known it. Most people that have watched our movie or read the book, they didn't even know. The friends of mine, like, wow, I had no idea. I was really good at pretending to be somebody I wasn't, pretending to be this jolly, happy guy, but I had this stuff down deep that was just tearing me up, right? So I medicated it with alcohol. So if I'd have found this forgiveness many years earlier, which I wished I would have, I wouldn't have had to deal with all the other stuff that, the difficult life that I had. And so there was so much in making the movie. In every interview, we interviewed probably 80 people.
You want to mention what the movie and book are?
The movie and book's called The Father Effect. But in the movie itself, I was blown away that we interviewed over 80 people, and there was something in everybody's story, right? One of the ones we interviewed, a guy named Larry North, who's a fitness expert. He owns several facilities there in Dallas-Fort Worth, and he tells this great story. His dad was a gambling addict, right? His dad had been featured on 60 Minutes a couple of different times. And he said, me and my dad were kind of just back and forth, estranged. He'd come in and out of my life, and he said, his dad was out in Vegas, gambling addict in Vegas, driving a cab. And he said he got word that he was ill, and so he brought him back to Dallas, puts him in a hospital, and he talks to the nurse, the VA hospital there. He knew the nurse. He says, hey, keep me in the loop what's going on. Let me know what's happened. Not long after that, he gets a call from the nurse. She says, hey, you got to get down here because this doesn't look good. So he says he drops everything, hustles down. He says he goes walking in the room, and his dad's just laid out, passed out, non-responsive. And he says he goes over and just grabs his hand. He says, man, I said everything I've ever wanted to say to my father. I forgive you. I love you. All these things, right? He says he walks out of the room. And as soon as he gets out of the room, the nurse walks over to him. She's got tears rolling down her eyes. And she says, Mr. North, I didn't want to interrupt you, but your dad passed away shortly before you got here. And he said, you know what? I didn't do that for him. I did that for me. And it was the best thing I've ever done. And it was stories like that, right? The forgiveness, that life-changing power of forgiveness. It's not about the other person. It's for us, right? There was an instance, one of the other people we interviewed was John Eldridge, who's an author. And he tells this story about the father wound. And he says, for so many people, we prescribe all these pain pills and all these prescriptions to cover the wound, if you will, the pain and suffering that comes from the wound. And he said, when you get to the heart, the root of the wound, the father wound, if you will, you get to it, you admit that you've got one and that you need help. You heal that, you don't need the medication anymore. And that was my story. Once I found forgiveness from my dad, I didn't have a desire to drink. Because I wasn't medicated. There was nothing for me to medicate, right? There was nothing for me to cover up. So it was those type of stories. And there were so many powerful ones that I heard, constantly. There was the one that we interviewed some prison inmates. And one of the guys' name was Jose. And he talked about his dad. He was like 13, 14 years old, and he said his mom would send him down the street to drag his dad out of the bar. And many, many nights, this is how it played out with his family. He'd get his dad back from the bar, and he'd be hammered drunk, and his dad would just start to literally physically abuse his mom. He said, John, when I was 16, when I became what I thought was a man, he said, guess what I started doing? I started getting drunk and physically abusing my mom because that's what I thought was normal. That's what I saw my dad do. As distorted as that sounds and crazy, he thought that was normal because that's what he saw his father do. So it's story after story like that you realize the impact that we as fathers have, right? And it's brought a new awareness to my life. The forgiveness radically changed my life as a man, husband, and father. It totally changed the game for me, right? My wife, a couple of years into this journey, and I'd found the forgiveness from my dad. I asked my wife, I said, do you have any regrets? And she said, the only regret I have is that the John I know today wasn't the John I knew for the first 14 years of our marriage. And it was bittersweet, but it was a great thing in the sense that I've talked and helped and coached, men and women through this father issue, if you will, and some will never get it. Some just never get the idea of forgiveness and it being more for them than their fathers. And there's a lot of dads out there that don't think they need to be forgiven. They don't think they've done anything wrong, right? So again, it's for you, not for them. But it's in the midst of all of it, there's a lot of angry guys and girls, men and women out there, and most of them don't even know why they're angry. And so, I start having these conversations with people, and it's so fascinating to me because so many times. You start peeling back the onion, it comes back down to a father wound, a father issue. And I've got a therapist buddy of mine who he kind of jumped on board with what we were doing early on. And he said, John, he says, I've counseled hundreds of people, couples, individuals, whatever. And he says, doesn't matter if it's addiction, cutting, whatever, all the different things that he has to deal with and see. He says almost every time it comes back down to a father wound, father issue. And you look at a lot of our own social stuff, right? The incarceration, all the addiction, all of those different things, and it's pretty amazing that's the epidemic. And it was so much bigger of an epidemic than I ever imagined when I started making the film and kind of started sharing my story. And I when I first found forgiveness and it changed my life, I started kind of sharing with other people, and everybody I talked to had a story. Everybody started telling me their story. And more times than not, it wasn't necessarily a good experience, right? So that's when it hit me. I was like, man, I got to share my story, because this is an epidemic that's just so massive, so much bigger than I imagined. So
what age were you when the concept of forgiveness really hit you?
41.
41.
So literally, Dad committed suicide when I was 11. It was 30 years later. So it's interesting, there's a date, and I didn't know this till long after I'd found forgiveness, and I was having a conversation with my mom. My dad was sentenced to prison on February 20th of 1969. I had started the journey of finding forgiveness for my dad on February 20th, 2009. Had no idea, exact date. So it was kind of one of these crazy things of my dad losing his freedom, right? And me starting this journey to find mine. So it was very, very interesting.
What was your dad like until you were 11?
He was a big man, physically. And what's interesting is in one of the counseling sessions, when I started counseling, I couldn't even say the word dad without weeping because of what that word meant to me in my life. Father, dad, I couldn't get it, right? I was so pissed. I was so mad. And I used to refer to him as a coward and, SOB, and you name it. That's in my own head. I was so angry. And now, man, it's nothing but compassion and love because I see him for who he really was, right? But in the midst of one of the counseling sessions, the counselor asked me, give me memories of your father. And I couldn't come up with one. Could not remember a single memory. And to this day, I don't remember a thing that just me and my father. Now, I'm sure we did when I was
11
whatever.
is old enough to remember.
Yeah. But I don't remember a single time just me and my dad. And that killed me. That broke me. I mean, I cried because I was like, man, how is that possible, right? I was like, that doesn't make sense, right? And so, he had his issues. There was a conversation. This was another one of the blessings of this journey I've been on and just understanding more and more about my dad and the power of forgiveness. We were shooting the trailer. There's this great trailer that a group there in Dallas-Fort Worth helped me shoot. It was the day my dad killed himself. And it's a pretty powerful trailer. And they did a phenomenal job. And as we go to shoot it that day, the actor that played my father comes walking up, and I was blown away. Like, this is eerie. This dude looks just like my old man. I mean, it was crazy scary. And he held up these two shirts, and one of them was kind of this old blue jean looking shirt. And I was like, boom, that's exactly the one my dad used to wear, right? It was crazy. So my dad's had holes all in it because he rolled Prince Albert. It did his own cigarettes, and half the time he just wasn't paying attention. He had holes all in his shirt from cigarette and whatever. But as we're standing there at the back of the car, he's trying to get into character. And he asked me the question. He said, man, what do you think your dad was thinking that day? What was he going through? It's the first time I'd ever been asked that question.
He's
And I
probably
was like-
afraid of the mob getting their fourth guy, right?
So he was headed back to prison that day for writing bad checks, writing hot checks. And that's why he told my mom many, many times, I'm not going back to prison.
Oh.
So that was the reason. Now there's been a lot of talk and, whatever. But he had told my mom, and he left a suicide letter. He left a suicide note. He was an interesting dude. He had pawned my mom's wedding ring. And the day he went to kill himself, he actually went and got it out of pawn and left it on the dresser that day as a way, I think, of saying, hey, I'm sorry to my mom. So anyway, we're back at the back of the car, and he says, hey, what do you think your dad was going through? And it hit me. I was like, man, what takes a guy to that point in his life where he's willing to pull the trigger to end it all?
Were
right?
you around? Do you remember that day?
I do.
Discovering your dad?
I didn't discover him. So the way it went was he had dropped me off that morning, which was a little unusual because he wasn't around a whole lot. He was traveling and just wheeling and dealing and doing his thing, right? Struggled with gambling and alcohol and a lot of other stuff. But he dropped me off. I remember the day like it wasn't that long ago. Dropped me off and then rolled down the window. I'd gotten out of the car as in 5th grade, and he says, hey, you forgot something. So I go, peeking back in the car, he goes, you forgot to give me a kiss. So I leaned over, gave him a kiss, and that was it. That I was in 5th grade. That day, I was sitting on top of my desk. We were having kind of a cool, special day watching a movie in class. And the principal walks up. And he says, hey, John, you need to come to the office. And I'm thinking, I was a pretty good kid. I don't know why I'm going to the office. So we go to the office, and my pastor was there. And I was thinking, oh, okay, something's really not right. So he says, hey, we need to go home. I said, okay, so I only live, about a mile away from the school, but that mile felt like it took forever. And I remember pulling up. We lived in Section 8 housing, and I remember my mom was out on the balcony. I could tell she was really distraught. And it's interesting because I don't remember a lot after that. I don't remember how she told me. I don't remember how I responded. All I remember is some friends from our church had come over, and they'd brought a guy that was my age, friends of mine. And they were like, hey, y'all go out and play. And I remember just like, he's trying to be a friend, and hey, let's go climb on the monkey bars and do all this stuff. And I remember just sitting there going, my life's never going to be the same. I remember being cloudy and gloomy and overcast and just going, wow, this is, my life's never going to be the same. But yeah, that's the moment of, what I remember. But I've been really blessed with an amazing wife and 3 incredible daughters that truly are gifts in my life, right? And the simple fact that I've gotten a second chance to be the man, husband, and father I was created to be. And not a lot of guys get that second chance.
And you're still young enough to enjoy it.
Yes. Yeah, very much so. Very, very, very lucky in the sense that I, somewhat figured it out. And I realized that I had this thing that I needed to take care of and get healing from.
But therapy was a big part of that?
Huge. Yeah, I would not be where I'm at right now. I may have eventually found forgiveness. I think it would have been tough without my counselor guiding me through it, because he helped me unpack some stuff, and he called my bluff when I was, not telling the truth or trying to avoid whatever. And, when I had both feet and hands up against the door and I wasn't going to walk through there, he was grabbing my hand, walking me through it. He was helping me, encouraging me. But he knew what to ask, right? He knew what questions. He knew where to go and kind of how to guide me through that process. of forgiveness, and he was a big part of that. That, along with the conversations with my mom. I learned so much about, at 41, almost 15 years ago, I learned so much about how to be a better dad and be a better husband. And sharing my story with my girls, man, what a great thing. Because now, and I started doing it when they all hit 12, 13, age appropriate, right? Started sharing more and more. It wasn't like I sat them down all in one sitting and said, hey, here's all the stuff. Here's all Dad's junk. So just little by little. But what it did is it helped them see that, man, I'm just human. Again, I'm a flawed, jacked up, wounded, imperfect dude. And for them to see that and know that I can share those stories with them, they see me as real, right? I got stuff. To this day, I got my junk, right? Still struggle with all these different things. But then I think it shows them you're real. And then it also shows them that they can come to you with their stuff, right? So just them seeing, I've talked to them about my struggle with depression and the alcohol, all the different things, and they just see. And they see, you know what, Dad's doing the best he can. And they see that, okay, these little things, now it makes sense. The little anger and the frustration. And, I've had the conversation with my girls about, to this day, as a grown man, I still struggle with certain things as it relates to walking through life not having the affirmation from a father, right? I think the men that I know that had an engaged, involved father in their life, they walk with a confidence, man, and a courage and a boldness that I think a lot of us who didn't have that struggle with. It's always that question of, am I worthy? Am I a man? What does that look like, right? Do I have what it takes? It's always looking for those answers as a young man. And unless you get them from a father or father figure, it's a struggle, because you're going to go look for them in other ways, right? You're going to do a lot of different stupid things.
To compensate.
Absolutely. Yeah. So there's been it's been a heck of a journey, and continues to be. We've been very, very blessed, and the people that I've been able to connect with and the stories I hear, it's all about the stories, right? And just the people that share those stories and how they overcame and found forgiveness for their own fathers.
Let me ask you a question. Is religion a big part of your life?
Absolutely.
It is. Okay.
Yeah.
Because for me, it's not at all.
Yeah.
But I'm the biggest fan of forgiveness you'll ever find.
Absolutely. And you know what? Yeah, my faith has played a very big part in my journey. The forgiveness, and as it relates to that, it's like, how can we expect to be forgiven if we're not going to forgive others?
Well, all forgiveness really is understanding. Because if you understood what your dad or his dad or your mom or your ex-wife or your whatever was dealing with and went through and had to deal with since the age they were 5 years old, you would forgive. If you understood, you would forgive.
Amen. That's it. It's about grace, right? The reason why I reached out to you initially was hearing all these people's stories and going, man, I get it. I've been there.
That's what I hope people grasp from all these, or get from all these videos that I put out, is like, if you understood why these people are doing what they're doing, you'd forgive. And once you forgive, then you can kind of work with what the problem is and maybe change things for the future. I don't know how fixable all these people are. There's a few that have pulled themselves out, but for the most part, the damage that was done to a lot of these people is pretty permanent. I mean, I don't want to give up hope, but you look at the figures and it's a very small percentage that pull themselves out.
I think, to your point too, it is the key, and it was the key for me. It was, for people listening, it's go find out more about your old man. Go hear stories. Even to this day, fascinated by stories about my dad.
And I can guarantee you, if you delve into that, whether it's your mom or your dad or your whatever, and you find out what your dad's story was, it would really come to the surface. The
generational curse, if you will, it's a real thing. And I talk to to many different men and women. It's interesting because you find a young man who's struggling with alcohol, right? He's an alcoholic. And I just start talking with him, man. And, hey, well, did your dad like to drink? Oh, yeah, you know what? My dad liked to drink, too. How about your grandfather? Man, now that you mention it, my grandfather liked to drink quite a bit, too. And all of a sudden, the docs, they start to connect the dots. This generational thing, it's a real deal.
It's a shame we didn't have videos like what I'm doing for your dad and the great-grandfather.
Absolutely. And it's not just addiction.
Because if you had these videos, you would see, oh, that is the pattern that I am following, and I need to break the pattern.
That's it. It's breaking the chain, breaking that cycle. I think, and it's not just addiction. It can be feelings of rejection. It can be anger. It can be all these different things, right?
I mean, sometimes it's anger. With guys, often it's anger, but sometimes it's just lack of self-worth. That's what I see so often.
No, it is. And to your point, it's, we're not born evil. As a little baby, innocent baby, you're not born going, I want to be a drug addict or I want to be homeless or whatever. There's things that happen along your life. And again, back to the father wound and some of the things that I see all the time, so much of it comes down to, it's a dad who said you'll never amount to anything. You're going to be worthless.
That's exactly what I got.
And it's a dad never saying I love you or I'm proud of you or I believe in you, right? It's a silent father that never says anything, right? It's a dad who's physically abusive. The father wound plays itself out in so many different ways. And so, one of the pieces in our movie is interesting. It's kind of the principle of transference. How we see our earthly father is how we see God or our heavenly father in the faith space, right? It's, man, if my dad was this over-the-top military-style disciplinarian, performance-based, I only got love if I performed good on the baseball field, soccer field, whatever, then he'll love me. But if not, he don't really love me. Then we think that's the way God is. God's sitting up there as a judge with a gavel going, I can't wait to punish him again, right? Or for him to do another stupid thing. That's how we see him. For the dad who is the distant aloof guy that, we interviewed a former stripper in the movie. She talks about how her mom and dad got divorced at an early age. Dad moved to a different city, different state. And she said, I kind of just went to him and I really needed him. But other than that, didn't really reach out and have a lot of connection with him. And she said, that's the way I saw God. Kind of just went to him. I really needed him, but, he's kind of doing his own thing, whatever. So there's this, it is. We as fathers, that's the kind of impact we have, right? And again, we're not perfect, man. It's about grace and forgiveness, right? My kids are going to have to forgive me because of the things I've done and the stupid mistakes I made as a dad, and whatever. But again, it goes back to, I think they know that I love them, right? And love covers a lot. And then they know I'm doing the very best I can. I'm doing the very best I can. And, I as a father, again, so much that I learned through the journey, it's, as a man, husband, and father, I'm setting the standard by which my daughters are going to measure every man, husband, and father. And I'm setting a standard by which sons are going to measure themselves as men, husband, and fathers. So understanding that influence that I have as a father, I walk in a different awareness now, right? And probably I overthink things. I'm probably on the extreme because I'm always constantly thinking of everything, little thing, whatever, how I say this, or what I do, and whatever. So I probably overthink it and overdo it sometimes, but again, my kids see, man, I'm doing the best I can to be a better dad every day, right? It's about getting up every day, just doing the best you can,
It's so important to understand this kind of stuff because it manifests itself. The effects from this will show up in not just your career or your ability to provide for your family or even your ability to be there for your family, but also in your romantic relationships. It'll seep into everything about you.
Yeah,
until you resolve it.
Absolutely.
Understand it.
That's it. I've got friends of mine that are single guys. And
even like I didn't have a whole lot of problems with my mom, but I had problems with my dad. We always kind of butted heads. We get along great now, but at the time, that was always my issue. It doesn't show up in my work at all. It shows up in my relationships with women only, and it's weird because you would think it would be like man issues that it affects, but it affects my choice in women.
And I think we compensate in certain areas. We're good in some areas, but we're compensating the others, right? Sometimes it's like a functioning alcoholic. He can go do a pretty decent job at work. It's once he gets off. It's in other areas of his life that you start to really see it take place. And so I think it does. It plays itself out. And man, I've seen it all, right? And the people over the last 13, 14 years that we've talked to and that I've interviewed in the stories, it's crazy. But it usually comes out, especially in men, as anger. And that anger, I've said this many times, unforgiveness is a wound that will haunt you and your kids for the rest of their life, right? It has that kind of impact, and most of us don't see it unless it comes to our attention or somebody brings it to, makes us aware of it. But it's something that can have damaging effects to all of those people that you love, your relationships, your family, work. It can impact in so many different ways that you don't even know. You can't even see it, right? I've got friends of mine that growing up hated their fathers, absolutely hated them. And I see them now in their mid-50s, just like their old man. They have no idea.
Yeah.
And they're treating their kids the same way, and now their kids hate them, but they can't see it. They just don't see it that, we try so hard, and this was me. I didn't want to be anything like my old man. I was like, ain't no way. I'm going to be everything opposite, right? I was trying to prove to a world that didn't even know it needed proof, and to everybody else that I was going to make it on my own. I was going to be a success despite of my old man, right? And that's what drives a lot of people. There's a lot of very successful people. That's it. They're driven because I'm going to show my own man.
Oh, absolutely. That's I'm doing.
It.
That's
right?
what I'm doing, yeah.
Yeah. And so there's all these things. One of the guys we interviewed, he lived in a really nice house. Him and his wife had matching Lexuses. He had a $300,000 boat. You name it. He had everything materialistic-wise. And he sat there in his living room and he told me, he said, John, he says, you see all this stuff? I do this. I've accumulated all this. I'm still doing this to this day to hear my dad say, I'm proud of you. To this day, my dad's never said he's proud of me. And see me? And this guy was in his mid-50s, That's the power that we have as fathers. One of the guys we interviewed, 84-year-old guy named Dennis, sweetest man, such a good dude. I'd spoken at a church there in Dallas, and Monday morning, I got an email, and I just shared my story, and he said, man, I was really thinking about what you said, and I got to tell you a story. I said, man, can I come over and video you? So I went over and set up the video camera, and he just proceeds to tell me a story. He says, I was thinking a lot about what you said last night, about the power of forgiveness and all those different things, and he said on the side of my bed, and he said, I asked God to forgive me for all the anger, all the stuff I had toward my dad, toward him and everybody else. He said, then I asked my dad to forgive me. And he said, for the first time ever in 84 years, he said, I went to bed at peace. It's never too late. Never too late to find forgiveness.
The inability to forgive those kind of people in your life, your dad, your mom, your whatever, is the biggest problem I see in our country, or in our world, really. And it's why I started creating these videos. That's why I do it.
Dude, I love it too. I think I've told you that. I love what you're doing, man. Sharing stories. It's always been a fascination of mine, hearing people's stories, and just doesn't matter who you are, where you've been, what you've done. I just love to hear stories and how things have played out in people's lives and made them who they are.
There's something to learn from every single story.
Absolutely.
Whether it's something new that you're discovering or just to reaffirm something that you suspected or even knew, but just need to be reminded.
And I've still got a lot to learn. I'm still learning.
Don't we all?
Absolutely.
All right, John. Thank you so much for sharing your story.
Thanks for having me, brother.
That was a great one. Thank you, man.